This happened when I was in high school. It was the summertime, and I think that I was about 15 or so. So I was home alone because both my parents had work, and my older sister also worked. I was too young to have a job, so I just stayed home and played video games on most days. That's what I was doing on one morning when I heard a knock on the front door. I never liked to answer the door. I didn't know who it was, but I figured it to be a salesman or something. I didn't even bother to get up. Whoever was at the door knocked again one more time. I just ignored it and kept playing video games. I hoped that they would go away, and after that second time, they stopped knocking. I figured that they were gone, so I never left my bedroom. So I continued gaming, and I quickly forgot about it. It was maybe 1 or 2 hours later when I heard a knocking at the front door again. I figured that the same person was back, but I still didn't know who it was. This time, though, I figured that I better get up and see. Plus, I was curious if they were going to be knocking on the door multiple times a day. So I left my bedroom and I walked over towards the door. I saw some random guy standing there, and I had no idea who he was, but I still didn't want to answer the door. He didn't seem to notice me, so I quickly went away. I went back to my bedroom and then just hoped that the guy would realize nobody was going to answer the door. I didn't know what he wanted, but I didn't really care either. The knocking stopped, and I figured that he was gone again. Moments later, the home phone rang. I didn't know if it would be my parents or something, so I got up to answer it. When I arrived at the phone, I picked it up and said hello. I heard a man's voice on the other end who I did not recognize. He said, "Answer the door," and then he hung up. I was really freaked out now. I went over to a window and looked out, and saw that that same man was still standing there. I figured he had to be the one who just called. This was really strange, but it didn't make me want to answer the door anymore. In fact, it made me want to answer the door even less. A lot less. I went back into my bedroom and tried to just ignore it all. After that, I didn't hear any more knocking. Sometime later, I got up and checked out the window again, and the guy was not there anymore. I was glad that he was gone and hoped that he wouldn't come back. For the rest of that day, there was no more knocking. Soon my sister and parents got home from their jobs. I remember that later that night, my parents and I were in the living room. My dad noticed out the window there was a car parked on the side of the street. It was across the street, but sort of in front of our house. It was really rare to see cars parked on the street like that in our neighborhood. My dad said to my mom how it was strange. Then I remembered everything that happened, and I told my parents about it. My dad decided to go and see the car. All the lights were off, and we couldn't tell if anybody was inside of it, but I think we all figured that it was vacant. So my dad left the house and went outside. When he did, he had made it no more than 10 steps into the yard when the car suddenly started up. Then it quickly pulled away, driving off. It was definitely very suspicious, all right. After that, there was never any more knocking on the door when I was home alone. This happened when I was about 10 or 11, camping with my mom near a river in the woods. It was just the two of us out there, no one else around. The nearest farmhouse was a couple of miles away, but we were mostly alone. We had the tent set up and a small campfire going when a little before dark, this man arrived to our site. The area we were in was open to anyone wanting to camp, so it wasn't strange to see somebody else, but he had no gear with him at all. He made conversation with us and eventually came around to warning us that there were wild dogs in the area that we needed to watch out for. My mom and I were slightly uncomfortable because he didn't leave and said that he would stay at the campsite a while to protect us from the wild dogs. My mom hinted several times that we would be fine and that he was free to leave because we didn't need his protection. But he didn't leave. He stayed a long time, but there wasn't much we could do because it was a public campsite. He had the right to be there if he wanted, even though he had no camping stuff with him. Eventually, my mom told the man that we were going into our tent for the night, thanked him for keeping us company, and said that he could leave and we would be fine. I asked my mom quietly if he was going to hurt us, and she said of course not, but I could tell by the way her voice cracked that she was scared too. We didn't want to provoke him, but we didn't want to make him feel like we were scared either, so we just crawled into our tent while the man kept sitting on a log at the fire pit. I don't think my mom slept that night, as she had a knife close to where she lay in the tent. I watched the man through the flap in the tent for a while. At one point, while sitting by the fire, he pulled out a long knife and started sharpening it on a stick. He just stared down at the blade and ran it along the stick, making these slow scraping sounds. I asked my mom if he was going to kill us, and she kept saying no, but I could tell that she was worried. She tried not to show it, but she was prepared for the worst. I eventually fell asleep, but woke up a lot to see my mom was still awake, lying there and listening to the scraping sound of the knife on the stick. By morning, the guy was gone. I wasn't sure how long he had stayed or when he left. After packing up our gear, we stopped by the nearest farmhouse to tell somebody about the strange man. At the farmhouse, the old man there listened to our story, then kind of chuckled and said, "Oh, that's just Ivan. He means well, just doesn't know how to mind his own business." Apparently, he lived on a farm nearby, and the old man promised us that he'd have another word with his neighbor, reminding him not to be so rude and strange. A few years later, after our camping trip where we had met Ivan, I saw something disturbing. I was watching the news, and a man had been arrested who was a suspect in several missing person cases. They showed his photo on TV, and even though it had been a few years ago, I instantly noticed it was the guy who had been with us at the campsite. His name was Ivan Milat, a serial killer who had been picking up hitchhikers along the highways and killing them, and burying their bodies in the woods right across the river from where we had camped. I can't even describe the way I felt when I realized it. The guy who had been lurking outside our tent, sharpening a knife, talking about wild dogs, had been a serial killer. We had come so close to him, and I had no idea at the time. I don't think I'll ever forget that night and how lucky we were, but it still haunts me.
I'm one of those people that's always getting a new phone. I get one almost every year. For me, it's just a personal preference. A lot of times, I trade in my old phone for a new one, but that's not always the case. I happened to just buy a new iPhone a while back, but I still had my old one, so I decided to sell it on Facebook Marketplace. The phone was still pretty new, and I figured that somebody would want it. I listed it for a reasonable price, and within a day, someone had made me an offer. I sold it to them, and after receiving payment, I shipped it to the buyer, which was a man named Elliot. Now, everything seems normal, and it was. He got the phone, and I thought that was the end of that. But maybe like a week later, I got a friend request on Facebook from Elliot, the buyer of the phone. I didn't know him at all, other than that he bought my phone. I clicked on his profile, and I knew that he lived in the same state, in a city that was like an hour or two away. When I clicked on his profile though, there wasn't all that much information because we weren't friends. I thought that it was kind of weird though, so I declined his request. The next day, he sent me a message. He asked me why I declined his request and said that he really wanted to be friends with me. I told him, "I just sold you the phone. I don't know you at all other than that. Please don't take it personally. I just don't know you." He kept sending me messages though. He called me some things that I will not repeat here, and he seemed pretty angry. At that point, I blocked him. It was really strange to say the least, but I thought that was the end of it. Now, Elliot did not contact me through Facebook or any other social media for that matter after that. What he did was much worse. The next night, a few hours after I had gotten home from work, there was a knock on the front door. I walked over to the front of my house and looked out the window to see what looked like Elliot standing there. I couldn't believe that he was actually at my house. I never would have guessed that he would have done that. When I saw this, I jumped back and walked away from the door. He knocked again. There was no way that I was answering the door. This guy had to be insane. I heard him yell that he knew I was home from the other side of the door. I'm not sure how he knew that. Maybe he heard me walking when I went by the door. I didn't think that he saw me when I looked out of the window. Still, I wasn't going to answer it. Instead, I called the police. I told them that a man who I had met on Facebook showed up at my house unannounced and uninvited and would not leave. I was told that somebody would be there shortly, and the police got there much faster than I expected. Elliot basically stayed on my front step. He didn't try to force entry, but he sure wasn't leaving. When the police got there, they talked to him, and then they talked to me as well. Eventually, they got Elliot to leave and told him that if he came back, he would be arrested. He agreed not to come back, and luckily, he kept his word. I haven't seen him or been contacted by him since then. I still can't believe that he did that, though. This is a story that took place back when I was a kid. I was probably somewhere between the ages of 8 and 10. At that age, I loved Christmas, mainly because of all the things that I would get. I lived with my parents, brother, and sister in a 2-story home in a typical neighborhood. Each year, we would do lots of decorating inside and outside of the house. Our Christmas tree would go in the corner of our living room, and all the presents would go underneath it. On Christmas Eve that year, we went to my grandparents' house, and then we were going to my uncle's on Christmas. That night on Christmas Eve, after we all went to bed, I had a difficult time falling asleep. I usually did when I was a kid because I was always so excited for Christmas. I finally was able to doze off for a bit, but woke up sometime later when it was still the night. I remember just turning over to try to go back to sleep, but then I thought I heard a noise. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs. My bedroom was the closest to the stairs, and even I could barely hear it. I looked at the clock, and it was 2 a.m. I didn't know why anybody would be up at this hour. Being that young and a curious kid, I decided to go and look. I left my bedroom and then walked a few feet to the railing of the stairs that overlooked the living room. I looked down, and everything seemed normal. All of the lights were off, but the lights from the Christmas tree and the few other decorations were on, so I could see a little bit. I looked down at the tree for a little while longer. It was very large, and we always got the biggest tree that we could find. But then I saw somebody come out from behind the tree. It wasn't my dad or brother, but a random guy that I didn't know. As soon as I realized that it was a random guy, I turned and ran. I went to the end of the hallway where my parents' bedroom was. I woke them up and told them that there was some guy in the house. I remember that my dad got up to look. He came back a short time later and said that he saw somebody leaving the house through the window. The police were called, and when they got out to our house, searched all over our property. They didn't find the guy, but they did find that our window was broken. None of us had heard it break, so the guy must have quietly done it somehow. It was a living room window that was broken, and I think that I saw him not long after he got in the house, because nothing was even stolen. I think that he either saw me or heard me, and that scared him off. I'm just really glad that he didn't try to come upstairs or anything. It still really freaked me out knowing that somebody broke in. It took me a long time to be able to fall back asleep, but eventually I was able to. That was by far my craziest Christmas experience. Nothing like that has happened since, much less on Christmas. I still don't know who the guy was though and why he chose our house. I also don't know if the police ever found him. Each year when I was a kid, we would celebrate New Year's Eve and stay up late. Normally, I would go to bed at about 10 o'clock, but on New Year's Eve, I would stay up until around 2 a.m. My sister and my parents and I would play board games and watch movies. We would then watch the ball drop when it was midnight and would stay up for several more hours. I think this happened when I was about 12 years old. That time, like any other, we played games and watched a couple of movies. This continued well past midnight, and at roughly 2 a.m., we all got tired and finally decided to go to bed. We could sleep in the next day because nobody had work or school. Our house was on a pretty quiet street. Other than that, it was a pretty typical neighborhood. I stayed up a little bit later than everybody else that night because I was watching a movie in the living room. When it ended, I finally went to bed. I remember getting back into my bedroom and turning out the lights. When I did, I could see very clearly into the front yard because of the moonlight. There was a woman standing in our yard. She was not facing me, and I didn't recognize her. I walked over to the window, and when I did, the woman turned and faced me. She saw me and then started to walk closer into my direction. This really creeped me out. Nobody was supposed to be in our front yard. Nothing like this had ever happened before. I moved away from the window and hid. I ducked down and laid on the floor so that she couldn't see me. My window was pretty large, and I did not have a cover on it at the time. Now, my bedroom was also on the second floor, so she couldn't directly reach me, but I was still terrified. I waited there, just hoping that she would go away. A few minutes went by. Then I heard something hit my window. I wasn't sure as to what it was. I started watching my window, and something else hit it. The woman was throwing sticks at it. She was trying to get my attention, and I don't know why, but I got up. I carefully looked out of the window again. The woman was still there and looking right up at me, this time closer. She said something, but I couldn't hear her. Then I saw her motioning for me to let her inside. I was not going to do that. She then walked to the side of the yard near the front door. Then she knocked on the front door. I didn't move. I was hoping that my parents or sister would wake up. I didn't have the thought to call the police for some reason. It just never entered my mind. The woman knocked on the door on and off for like 5 minutes. Finally, she walked away. I watched her from the window walk to the end of the driveway and then a little ways down. She then got inside of a vehicle and drove off. The whole situation was really bizarre, and it really confused me. The next morning, I told my parents about it. They had no idea what she could have been doing either. Luckily, though, she never came back. This is something really bizarre that happened to me last winter. I live by myself in a smaller one-story home. The neighborhood that I live in is somewhat typical. However, I know most of the nearby neighbors pretty well and get along with all of them. Last winter, we got a pretty bad snowstorm at one point. It was over a weekend, and it started one night at roughly 5 o'clock. The snow was supposed to last until early the next morning, and we were going to get several inches of it. Everything was normal other than the snowstorm, and I went to bed at about 11 p.m. and then woke up the next morning at probably like 7:30 or 8. My bedroom is at the front side of the house, and as soon as I sat up and looked out of the window, something shocked me. There was a snowman that was built and looking right into my bedroom window. The snowman was very well done and had eyes and a mouth made from buttons. It was probably about 5 feet away from my window. It spooked me at first until I realized what it was. But then, I wondered how it got there. I certainly hadn't made it. It had to have been my next-door neighbor's kids. My next-door neighbors were a husband and wife who had kids in their early teens and middle school ages. They were the only kids in the immediate area of the neighborhood. Still, it seemed kind of unlike them to do that. Why wouldn't they just build it in their own yard? Plus, they were usually well-behaved, and I didn't think that they would even go into my yard without permission. I went outside to snowplow my driveway. When I got out there, I saw my next-door neighbor. His name is Todd, and he was already out using his snowblower. I walked over to him at the end of the driveway and waved. He stopped his snowblower and said that I had a nice snowman in the front yard. I told him that I didn't know how it got there and asked him if his kids had made it. He said no. He told me he had been inside with his kids watching a movie the night before. He assumed that I had made the snowman. We just joked about it after that, though. It was a pretty funny thing, but also a little bit strange. After that, I finished clearing my driveway and went back inside. The temperatures that we were having were in the high 20s all the way up to the mid-30s. This created good snowball or snowman snow. Fast forward to the next morning, I woke up and then went into the kitchen. The kitchen is at the back side of my house, and there's a window out to the backyard. When I looked out of it, There was another snowman. It hadn't been there the day before, and it was facing the back window, looking right at me just a few feet away. Somebody had made another one. This one, like the first, was very well made, but unlike the other one, it had some different props. Instead of just having a face made out of buttons, it had a gardening shovel used as its hand, and it was made to look like it was holding a pitchfork. I realized that the shovel and pitchfork had come from my garage. I went outside and then went to the garage. The back door was left open. Nobody was inside of it though. I was really creeped out now. Somebody was going into my yard in the middle of the night and making snowmen. This time they had entered my garage. I had left the door unlocked by accident, and I made sure to lock it. When whoever it was made a snowman in the front yard, I thought it was funny. But now that it was in the backyard and they went inside of my garage without permission, this was too far. Still, I had no idea who was doing it. At night, I never heard or saw anything. That night, I even looked out of the windows multiple times before going to bed. I didn't see anybody though. The next morning when I got up, both of the snowmen were destroyed. They were just gone and nowhere to be seen. Somebody had tore them down. I was really weirded out by the whole situation. After that, there were no more strange occurrences though. No more snowmen and no more strange things happening. I still wonder to this day who did that.
I live alone. This is something that happened just a few months ago. So my apartment is pretty standard for the most part. However, the front door opens right up to the outside and there's a small grass area there. To the right of that is the parking lot. Then there are several levels of units. Mine is on the first level. I was at home one evening after I had gotten back from work. I was in the kitchen cooking, and right in the middle of that, my doorbell rang. I wasn't able to go over to the door right away, but I stopped what I was doing and then went over there. This was maybe 20 seconds after the bell had rang. When I got there though, I didn't see anybody. I looked out the window to as much as I could see and there was nobody there. So at that point, I just went back to cooking. I didn't really know who it could be or why somebody would be ringing my doorbell. I figured that it was most likely someone at the wrong apartment though. Nothing else happened for a while. Several hours later, I was in my living room just hanging out. Then the doorbell rang again. I remembered from before and wondered if that person was back. Then the doorbell started ringing again and again a bunch of times really fast. I was so confused. I got up and started walking over to the door. In the time that I was going over there, the doorbell ringing stopped. Before opening the door though, I made it to the window and then looked outside. When I did, I was surprised to see that nobody was there again. They had been ringing my doorbell so many times in a row like they really wanted me to answer, and now they were just gone. I didn't know what to make of it. I looked around for several minutes but didn't see anyone. After that, I went back to what I was doing. I only stayed up for maybe another hour if that. Then I was tired and decided to go to bed. I started turning off the lights in my apartment, but before heading to my bedroom, I went over to the front door and looked out of the window one last time. However, this time I saw something. There was this tall and kind of thin man just standing there a few feet away from my door. He wasn't facing me, but kind of to the side. He didn't appear to really be doing anything though. The guy was wearing all black clothing, and I had no idea who he was. I thought that this was maybe the person who kept ringing my doorbell. It just seemed really suspicious though. I watched him for several minutes. The man just stood there and sort of looked around. Then he started walking away slowly. He went in the grass area out front, and then he walked across the quiet street that was there. After crossing, he walked right into the woods. There was no path or anything. He just went right in, and the woods there is very thick. I was so confused and also creeped out. Since then, I haven't had any more strange doorbell rings or anything. I also haven't seen the guy, and I'm still wondering who he is and what he was doing. I'm also wondering why he just went in the woods like that.
Something weird happened to me last week. I was having a movie night by myself in my apartment. I live alone and on the second floor. My apartment building is fairly new, and I really like it. The place I live in has 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room, and a kitchen. I was on my second movie of the night, and the time was about midnight. It was Saturday, so I didn't have work or anything the next morning. My apartment happened to be on the far end of the hallway, and it was right next to the stairs that people would occasionally use. The elevator was in the center of the hallway, which is much more common for people to use. I heard the door to the stairs open and then close. It sounded like somebody was walking by down the hallway, and I didn't think anything of it, but I realized soon that it sounded like more than one person, maybe almost 10. I thought it was a little weird, but expected them all to pass by. It seemed like they all stopped right outside of my doorway though. Maybe they were going to the place across the hall from me. The apartment across the hall though was not lined up with my door, but was a little ways down. I just got curious for some reason, so I paused the movie and got up. I walked over to the door and looked out the peephole. What I saw shocked me. There was like 10 guys standing in the hallway right outside my apartment, and they were all facing my door. I was instantly creeped out. I didn't know who any of these guys were, and they were all wearing all black and had hoods on, so I couldn't see much of their faces. This was really bizarre, to say the least. Nobody had knocked on my door though, and it didn't seem as though they were going to. They were just standing there. I considered for only a second opening the door and asking what was going on, but I thought better of it. I quickly walked away and decided to just ignore them. Still, I couldn't feel comfortable as long as they were all standing there. I was hoping and sort of expecting them all to move along and to keep walking away down the hallway. I listened for them to move away, but they didn't. I waited for a little longer before unpausing the movie, but I still didn't hear them walking away. The guys had to all still be there. I tried to distract myself by watching the film, but in doing so, I turned the volume down significantly. I didn't want the people outside to hear or know that I was home. As the movie played though, I still couldn't focus. It wasn't helping to distract me from the strange men standing outside my door. Then, I heard what I was sure sounded like my doorknob turning. It was very quiet, and the only reason I had heard it was because number 1, I was already thinking about the guys at the door, and number 2, my TV volume was now very quiet. This made me feel really creeped out, even more than I already was. I also started to feel like possibly I was in danger. I stayed where I was, not sure of what to do. For the next probably 10 minutes, I didn't hear any other noises or anything. I got up to see if the men were gone, and I was really hoping that they were. When I got to the door and looked out though, they were all still there. I ran back as quietly as possible. I sat back down on my couch and had no clue what to do in this situation. I didn't think I could call the police for this. They were just standing in my hallway. Yes, I thought they tried opening my door, but it's not like they were trying over and over or banging on the door. Looking back, I probably should have, but I was just hoping I wouldn't have to. After maybe 5 more minutes or so, I went back to look again. This time, when I looked out, they were all gone. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't even heard them walking away or anything. I was so paranoid that I kept looking back out my peephole every 10 minutes or so. Luckily, I didn't see them. But before going to bed, I was so worried about it that I left my apartment and walked the hallways, just making sure that the men were gone. I went throughout the whole entire building just about without seeing them. After that, I was finally able to go to bed. By now, it was past 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was really tired. I fell asleep pretty quickly. However, at some point, I was woken up in the night. I just remember waking up to the sounds of somebody knocking on my front door. They knocked about 2 times after I woke up. I knew it was probably the same guys, and I was terrified. I stayed in my bed and didn't even bother to get up. What could I do? Then, there was just silence. I was afraid they would break in or something. I couldn't believe that they were back, if that's in fact who was at the door. I really didn't want to get up and check though. I laid there in my bed for the longest time. It was probably about 30 minutes or so. I finally looked at the clock and saw that it was almost 4 a.m. Then I got up and checked the door. Nobody was outside in the hallway though. Whoever had knocked was gone. I went back to sleep after that and heard nothing more. Since then, everything's been fine.
Back in the day, I used to work at Sears.
This is when they were doing really well and had tons of stores. If anybody doesn't remember Sears, they were a large department store that sold many things like appliances and clothes. It's mostly gone out of business in recent years though. But when I worked there, we would get lots of people in the store. Well, one time I was working a long day in December. With it being around Christmas time, there were lots of people shopping for gifts and stuff. It was also a weekend, so that added to it. I worked basically all day and I saw countless people. When I was finally off of work, I was happy to go home and was tired. So I just remember that I clocked out of work and then left the store. I went out to my car and then drove back home. It took maybe 15 minutes or so to get back. Then I parked my car in the driveway and got out of it. However, as I was walking up to my front door, I heard a car coming down the street, which was usually very quiet. I noticed it but didn't really think that much of it at all, and I kept going. However, as I was opening my door to go inside, I happened to hear the car slowing down. I looked over to see that the car was starting to pull over to the side of the street in front of my house. So I stopped and I kept watching it because I wanted to see what this car was doing. I did not recognize the car as a neighbor or anybody that I knew. The car pulled over and came to a stop just in front of my mailbox. Then the driver's window rolled down a little, and I saw somebody open up my mailbox and then put something inside of it. I couldn't really tell who the person was from where I was. I think it was a man, but I'm not 100% sure. Anyways, I didn't really know what this person was doing or what they had put in my mailbox. After that, they rolled their window back up and then they drove away. I went back outside, and after seeing that the car was out of my sight, I walked down to my mailbox. I opened it and I looked inside to see an unmarked envelope. I brought it inside. When I opened up the envelope, there were several Polaroid pictures in it. They were all pictures of me. The first were me working at Sears earlier that day when I was at the registers working as a cashier. I had not known that any of these photos were taken. They were taken at a distance too, so it was not obvious to me and I never noticed it. There was then a photo of me walking in the store, I think when I went on my break. And the last photo was of me walking out to my car in the parking lot after work. This was clearly taken from inside of a car that was also in the parking lot. I hadn't noticed any of them. Of course, I was very freaked out by this. I didn't know what to do about it or anything. I didn't go to the police or report it, but I did tell my friends as well as coworkers. They were all just as confused as I was. The rest of my time working at Sears, I didn't notice anything else like that, and I never saw that car at my house again. I'm not sure where the pictures are. I think I still have them somewhere, but I couldn't find them. It's been so long. But I'd still like to know why that person did that. Was it just an elaborate prank? Why would they choose me though? And they must have followed me home without me noticing. It's all very strange. It was about a year ago when my parents and sister went out of state for a sports tournament, and I was left alone in the house for 3 days. I'd never been home by myself for that long, and I thought it would be nice to have some peace and quiet. The first night went by without anything out of the ordinary. I watched a couple of movies, made some popcorn, and went to bed around midnight. I didn't think much of it when I woke up in the middle of the night with an uneasy feeling. It was not anything specific, just a weird sense that someone was watching me. I shrugged it off and went back to sleep. The next day, everything seemed fine. I spent most of the time inside, just relaxing and watching more movies. By the evening, the feeling started to creep up again, like there was someone there, even though I was alone. I checked the house to make sure that all the doors and windows were locked, and everything looked normal. I even walked around the yard for a bit to see if anybody was outside, but I didn't find anything. By the time the third night rolled around, I was starting to get a little jumpy. I woke up again between 2 and 3 a.m. and I heard footsteps outside. It wasn't anything loud, just faint footsteps like somebody was walking on the gravel path outside. My heart started to race a bit, but I convinced myself it was probably just an animal, maybe a raccoon or something. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I couldn't fall asleep again, so I grabbed my shoes and flashlight, and I went outside to check things out and ease my mind. I walked around the house, shining the flashlight around, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel stupid about going outside alone in the middle of the night when I heard something from the woods behind the house. It was faint, but it sounded like a branch snapping, like something was walking through the trees. I don't know what made me do it, but I walked towards the sound. As I got about halfway from my house to the edge of the woods, I heard a loud, blood-curdling scream. I don't know if it was an animal or human, but it's a wild area behind my house, and it could have been a fox or a mountain lion.
Either way, I freaked out, ran inside, and locked all the doors and windows. I peered through the curtains, trying to see if I could spot anything or anyone. I opened the curtains to a man standing close to the window, staring directly at me. As soon as he saw me, he turned and sprinted towards the woods. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, so I stayed up and watched more movies, and thankfully nothing else happened that night. When my parents came back the next day, I didn't tell them what happened. Since then, I've been home alone 5 more times, and I've never seen the man again. I don't know what he was doing, and if the scream I heard was related to him or not, or just a coincidence from an animal, but it was a scary night. I don't go on Facebook that much, but I do go on from time to time, and last year something really strange happened. One day I went on Facebook for the first time in probably a couple of weeks. When I did, I saw that I had one new friend request and clicked on it to see who it was. The person appeared to have the same exact profile as me. They had the same name as me and the same profile picture. It was like they were pretending to be me. I clicked on the profile, assuming it to probably be a bot, but this was really strange. There was not a whole lot that I could see right away on the page, so I accepted the friend request to see more. After I did, I saw that this person pretending to be me had posted several of the same pictures that I had on my page, but this profile only had one friend, which was now me. I was still thinking that it was a bot of some sort, and this was really weird. I sent a message to the person saying, "What's the meaning of this?" They responded back rather quickly, saying exactly what I had said to them. "What's the meaning of this?" I asked who it was, and they wrote back the same thing, just imitating what I said. It was really weird. I figured at this point that it was probably some kind of a prank. I got off of Facebook and texted a few of my friends about it. However, when I did, none of my friends admitted to it and didn't seem to know what was going on. I know my friends pretty well, and they all seemed genuinely confused. The next day, I was really curious as to who it was, so I went back on and sent another message to the page. This time, hoping that it was a joke somebody was playing on me for some reason, I said, "This is a funny joke, but seriously, who are you?" The page responded just saying, "This is not a joke." They finally said something other than just what I had said to them. I asked them to stop pretending to be me, saying that it was really weird. They responded saying, "Okay, I will just take your account then." I didn't know what they meant by this, but I was annoyed and I blocked the page right then and there. I thought that was that. The next day, however, I got a Facebook notification randomly saying that several people had liked my photo. I hadn't posted anything lately, so I went on to see. That's when I realized that my account had been hacked. There was a picture posted to my account. It was my profile picture, but put through several filters, and it looked really weird. Whoever was behind this said they would hack my account, and they did. I really couldn't believe it. I quickly deleted the post and then changed my password. I hadn't told my previous password to anyone, so I don't know how they would have even known it. After that, I didn't go on Facebook for a long time, and also strangely, the person never hacked into my account again or sent me another friend request or message. I still don't know who did that or why. It's very mysterious. The house my husband and I have lived in for a while now has an Airbnb next door as neighbors. It has been operating for close to a year now as an Airbnb. My husband and I often notice the guests coming and going. Most of them would stay to themselves, and a few would talk to us, but they were all nice people. However, one night in late September, we encountered some creepy guests who were staying at the Airbnb. It was a warm evening, and we were settling down to watch a movie when I noticed movement outside. I glanced out the window and saw a younger-looking couple in the Airbnb's backyard. They seemed to be setting up something odd with candles and laying other things down on the ground. I showed my husband, and we both agreed that it was strange. Our best guess was they were setting up some sort of ritual. However weird it was, everyone has their own unique hobbies, and who were we to judge what they wanted to do with their time at the Airbnb? We watched them for a while, unable to tear our eyes away. Firstly, it was just fun to watch, but also, we wanted to make sure that nothing extremely creepy was going on. They took a while to set up, so eventually we got bored and went back to watching our movie. Before going to bed, I checked out the window to see if the young couple was still out there. They still appeared to be just hanging out with whatever stuff they had set up, so I dismissed it and went to bed. In the middle of the night, I was gradually awoken by sounds coming through our bedroom window that was open for air. I could hear soft murmurs outside, low and rhythmic. I glanced at the clock, which showed that it was past 2 a.m. now. I woke up my husband, and we went to check out why the neighbors were still up at this time. We got out of bed and made our way to the back of the house and looked out the back window towards the backyards. Surprisingly, this time the young couple was in our backyard, standing and making strange movements in the flickering candlelight. It appeared they were doing whatever ritual thing they had set up earlier. What was even stranger was there were some lights in the woods, which were way out on the property away from our house. I guess the couple had set up some candles way out in the woods as well, but I wasn't sure. It didn't make sense. Somehow, it felt scarier to go outside and confront the couple about being on our property, rather than just let them continue what they were doing. We double-checked the house, locking all our doors and windows just in case before going back to bed. The next morning when we woke up, we cautiously walked into our backyard, checking to see if anything was damaged. It looked like the couple from the Airbnb had already left, since their car was gone. Everything was normal in our backyard, thankfully, besides a note that we found in the middle of the lawn pinned down by a rock. I bent down and picked up the small piece of paper and unfolded it to read it. It read, "Thank you for your participation. You have been blessed. Nothing major happened to us in our yard that night, but it was just really creepy in general. We left a message with the owner of the Airbnb, recommending not to let that young couple stay in again in the future if they tried to." A few years ago, I stayed at an Airbnb for the first and last time in my life. A small group of friends and I were on vacation, and we found an Airbnb for cheap, which still looked nice. It was nice because we didn't need to have any interaction with the host, since it was just a lockbox on the door with the key. The host had texted us the combination to get the key from the box, and we were able to let ourselves inside. Once inside, we got settled in and started making dinner. The house was pretty nice, just like we thought. What was strange though, as we explored the rooms, we noticed there were a lot of valuables just sitting out. For example, one of the rooms had a PS4 plugged in, and in a drawer in another room, there was some car and house insurance things, as well as some cash in a wallet. We thought it was strange how trusting the host was of random people staying in his place not to steal anything. We weren't planning on taking anything, but I'm sure there's some people who wouldn't think twice about it. Anyways, later that night after eating, we checked out the rest of the place, picked our bedrooms upstairs, and eventually checked out the basement. As we explored the large basement, we came across a door that was locked. The door being locked itself wasn't anything strange, but the fact that many valuables were left laying around in the house made us think, if none of the valuables were behind the locked door, what would the door need to be locked for, and what was behind it? Anyway, we continued with the rest of the night and went to bed at a good time since we had to be up early the next day. In the middle of that night, while sleeping in my bedroom upstairs, I was woken up with the urge to pee. I tried to go back to sleep, but it was bad enough to keep me up, and I had to go to the bathroom. As I got out of bed and approached the door, I heard some movement out in the hallway. It sounded like somebody was shuffling down the carpeted hallway. I opened up my door to continue towards the bathroom, expecting to see one of my friends awake also trying to use the bathroom. When I opened my door, however, I saw someone at the end of the hallway opening a different door and look inside. I immediately could tell that this was not one of my friends based on the shape of the figure. I flipped on the light switch for the entire upper hallway, which was thankfully right near me. I screamed loud enough to wake up all my other friends as I saw a man at the end turn towards me with a look of surprise on his face. I was worried that he was going to attack someone, but thankfully, he seemed more ashamed and upset at getting caught snooping around the house and looking into our rooms. Turns out, he was the host of the Airbnb we were staying at. He tried to explain what he was doing here in the middle of the night, saying he was looking for some tools that he had left behind and needed for the morning. It wasn't a very convincing argument. After more questioning of the guy, we also found out he had been living in the locked room in the basement the whole time we had been there, even though he said we had the whole place to ourselves. Needless to say, all my friends and I are very certain that this guy was a creep and had probably been doing this to guests for years. On the bright side, at least he wasn't violent or aggressive, because we realized how much worse the situation at night could have been. I'm not certain what legal consequences this guy was faced with, but he did lose his right to rent out places at least.
A strange thing happened to me a couple of years ago. At the time, I lived in an apartment by myself. It was a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom place, and I lived on the second floor of the building. Overall, the apartment was not the nicest, and it didn't have that many units in it either. I knew a few of my neighbors, but not all of them. One night, I was at home by myself, like usual. It was sometime at night, I really don't know exactly the time, but there was a knock on my door. I walked over and answered it, without giving it that much thought. A man was standing there. He was kind of short and had dark brown hair. The man told me that he was my neighbor from down the hallway, and he pointed a ways to the left. He asked me if he could come inside of my apartment to make a phone call. He said that his Wi-Fi was not working, and he didn't have any service on his phone at the time, so without the Wi-Fi, he couldn't make any calls. I was not comfortable with this. I told the man sorry but no. He said that he would be really fast, and I told him that I really couldn't help him. He kind of came across as a little bit sketchy to me for some reason. The man turned to walk away, and I closed my door. I was really curious afterwards. I had never seen the man before, and had seen most of the people who lived in the building because it wasn't all that big. I thought maybe the guy would knock on another person's door, and I quietly opened my door and looked around the corner to see him walking away. He walked all the way to the end of the hall, and then he went inside of the elevator. I was suspicious that he didn't even live here. At one point or another, I had seen just about everyone that lived on my floor. After the man left, I went to one of the windows in my place. I looked out of it and to the guest parking lot where the main doors open up to. Now, there are assigned parking spaces for all the residents, and those are under the building. There's a small guest parking lot with like 10 spaces out front. I saw the man leave the building and then walk to an older looking car in the guest parking lot and drive away. He definitely didn't live here. So why would he lie to me and claim that he did? I didn't know, but the fact that he wanted me to let him inside of my apartment kind of creeps me out. He certainly made up the whole story about his Wi-Fi being down and him not having any cell phone service. I'm not sure how he got into the building in the first place, but most likely somebody else let him in when they were entering. After that night, I never saw him again. That pretty much confirmed to me that he didn't live there. I'm really glad that I didn't let him inside of my apartment. A couple of years ago, I bought a gaming computer on Facebook Marketplace. I've been wanting to buy one for a while, and I knew that they're typically very expensive. So that gave me the idea to go on Facebook Marketplace and look for a used one. After several days of looking, I found one that I wanted. I decided to reach out to the seller and ask a little more information about it. The seller was a guy named Jeremy. We went back and forth a little bit, and I decided that I wanted to buy it. It was a pretty good deal, so we agreed on a day that I would go over and get the computer. It also came with a monitor, keyboard, and mouse as well. So after I bought it, I took it home, set it up, and started using it. I was happy with my purchase, and I used the computer for the next week and a half. Then I got another message on Facebook from Jeremy. He said that he wanted his computer back. I was really confused when I saw this, because he had just sold it to me like a week before. He said that he changed his mind and wanted it back now. I didn't want to return it. I liked the computer, and I had already installed several games and other programs on it. I told Jeremy no, I wasn't going to return it. Then Jeremy said that he would give me a certain amount of money for it. The funny thing is that the amount he offered was less than I paid for the computer by a few $100s. I pointed that out, and he said that it was all he could afford to give. Now, when he originally said he wanted it back, I assumed that meant he would pay the full price. I said the answer was still no. I was really annoyed that this guy was trying to get the computer back, and even more annoyed that he wasn't offering the full price. If he didn't want to sell it, then he shouldn't have sold it. However, Jeremy was not happy that I refused to give the computer back. He then sent me a friend request on Facebook, and then started messaging me a bunch of times. I ignored him for a while, but after he kept sending me messages for like 3 days straight, I blocked him. I thought that was that,
This situation was strange enough, but unfortunately, that was not the end of Jeremy. Probably about a week after I blocked Jeremy, he showed up to my house. I happened to be home alone and was in my bedroom, on the very gaming computer that I had bought from Jeremy. It was nighttime and about 8 p.m. and dark out. I heard a knocking coming from the front door. I got up and left my room and went over to the living room and then looked out of the window. Jeremy was there on the front step. I recognized him from when I bought the computer. How did he know where I lived? This was really strange. I watched him stand there and knock again on the front door. I was wondering what on earth he had planned. Did he think that by showing up at my house unannounced that would make me change my mind? I stayed in the living room and ignored his knocks. I was hoping that he would just go away, and most of the lights in my house were off, so maybe he would think that I wasn't home. But I watched Jeremy hang around the front step for several more minutes. I was kind of looking around, and I had to move back from the window so that he wouldn't see me. He came back and knocked again on the front door, this time louder. He also yelled, asking for me to come outside. I still ignored him. I walked back to my bedroom, hoping that Jeremy would eventually give up and leave. When I got back to my room, I put in some headphones and sat back down at my computer. For the next 5 minutes or so, everything was fine. But suddenly, I heard a knocking sound. I took out my headphones and looked to the direction of my window. Jeremy was standing there, looking into my bedroom. I got up and ran over to the window and closed the blinds. Jeremy started yelling at me, but I couldn't really hear what he said very well. I left my bedroom and went back towards the living room. By that time, Jeremy had made his way back towards my front door. Then he started banging on it again. I went over to the door and shouted to him that I was going to call the police. Jeremy yelled at me to give the computer back. Then I called the cops. I told them what was going on, and Jeremy still wasn't leaving, and he continued to stay there, even after I got off the phone with the police. But unfortunately, he finally left just moments before the cops got there. I talked to them, gave them a description of Jeremy, and told them my side of the story. After that, the police left and said to call back if Jeremy ever returned. I was afraid that he would, but luckily he didn't. I still have a hard time believing how crazy it was, and I can't believe that that actually happened. It started one Saturday afternoon when I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through social media. I switched to a new phone and a new number a few months ago. My old number was still active, but I didn't think much of it because it had been quiet. Suddenly, my phone buzzed, and when I looked down, I saw it was a text from my old number. The message read, "I see you." It was odd because I thought it was just some spam or a wrong number, so I shrugged it off. A few hours later, another message came through saying, "You don't remember me?" I had forgotten to change my number on a few accounts, so it was possible that somebody had gotten a hold of it. I decided to reply, trying to keep it light, and I typed back, "Who is this?" The response was quick and said, "You know who I am." I didn't want to engage further, so I put my phone down and tried to watch a movie, but the messages nagged at the back of my mind. The next day, the texts continued, saying more creepy and odd things. I stopped replying for a while. Monday brought more messages, saying things such as, "I'm closer than you think," and "You'll remember me soon." I debated calling the police, but what would I even say? Somebody is texting me creepy things from my old number? It felt ridiculous. By Tuesday, I was on edge, and I couldn't focus at work. The messages were escalating, saying, "I know what you did last summer," and kept repeating, "You'll remember soon." I tried to block the number, but it kept coming through, so I finally decided to involve the police and see if they could do anything. I explained the situation, and they filed a report. The messages continued for all the next week, and I tried to ignore them as best as I could. I finally got a call from the police a week later. They had traced the text back to an old acquaintance from high school, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. He had been using some sort of app to send the messages from my old number. That night, I confronted him at his house, and his parents answered the door, so it ended up working out perfectly to involve them as well. It was awesome to see his face when he came downstairs and saw me talking to his parents and showing texts that he had sent to me. So that was the last problem I had with the kid, but it was still scary before I knew who was behind it all. I was selling a desk on Facebook Marketplace a few years ago. It was a pretty nice desk in my opinion, and I had bought it from IKEA just 2 years prior. However, I was going to be moving and I decided to get rid of it. During this time, I lived in a smaller house by myself. I remember that after I made the listing for the desk, it took a couple of days before I got any responses. When I did, I got a message from a man named Charlie. He said that he wanted to buy the desk. There wasn't a whole lot of conversation between us other than that. I was happy that somebody wanted to buy it, and I made sure that he was good with the price, which he said that he was. I thought the price was reasonable, so I was glad to hear that, and then I gave him my address. We agreed that he would come by the next evening at about 5 o'clock. And when the next evening rolled around, I had the desk just inside of my front door for Charlie to come and buy. He got there at about 5, and I let him inside of my house. Charlie was skinny with somewhat curly blondish hair. He was wearing a sweatshirt. After we said hi to each other, I showed Charlie the desk and I told him that I could help him take it to his car. Charlie went up close to the desk and looked at it. After a short time, he told me that the desk did not look like it did in the pictures. I asked him what he meant. I was very confused because it was exactly the same as the pictures. I had taken them just days prior when I had listed the desk, and I really hadn't touched it since. Charlie said that it just wasn't how he thought it would be. Then he said that he decided not to buy it. I was disappointed, but I said okay. Then he turned and left. I was confused by what he had said. I'm not sure what exactly he was expecting, because in my opinion, the desk was just as it was advertised in the listing. I decided to just move on, and hopefully somebody else would want to buy it. So the night went on, and I ended up staying up pretty late. It was nearly midnight. I was in the other room, and I heard the sound suddenly of somebody trying to open the front door. When I heard this, I walked over and looked out of a front window. I saw a man standing there, wearing a hat that was mostly covering his face. But I then realized that this was Charlie. I didn't know what he was doing. After literally trying to open my front door, he then walked away, but he didn't leave. Instead, he walked around to the back side of the house. He tried that door, which thankfully was locked. After that, things were quiet for a bit. Then he returned to the front. This time, he actually knocked on the front door of the house, but I was not going to answer it. After being at the front door, he moved to several windows. It seemed like he was trying to look inside. I had covers for most of them, but I could still see his shadow on the other side. After he was still in my yard prowling around for that long, I decided to call the police. I told them the whole story, and within 10 minutes, an officer was there. Meanwhile, Charlie had stayed there the whole time. When the police arrived, he tried running, but was quickly caught. He did not break in, and I think he ended up getting off for the most part. I have to think, though, that he was trying to find a good place to break into my house. I'm really glad that he didn't. It was a Friday night, and my friends and I decided to hang out at the park. We were bored, and the night felt perfect for some fresh air. Around 10 p.m., we heard a car approaching. It was slow, the headlights cutting through the darkness. At first, we didn't think much of it, but then we noticed it was moving towards us. As it got closer, we could see that it was an old beat-up sedan with the windows tinted, so we couldn't see who was inside. Probably just somebody passing through, I said, trying to shrug it off. But as soon as it got closer, the car stopped right in front of us. We looked at each other, unsure of what to do. The engine idled, and the driver's side window rolled down. Staring out the window that had just been rolled down was a clown, complete with a painted face and wild hair. He had a wide grin that looked more unsettling than friendly. "What's up, kids?" he shouted, his voice high-pitched, and he asked us if we needed a ride. We all exchanged nervous glances. Nobody said anything, and we just hoped that he would drive away. There was something off about him, his smile and the way his eyes seemed to be darting around. The clown called out to us again, saying, "Come on, don't be shy." My friend Sarah was the first one to say anything, as she whispered to us that we should leave, her voice shaking. She stood up and we all followed her lead, backing away from the bench. "Wait, where are you going?" the clown asked, still grinning. "I'm just trying to be friendly," he said. We turned and ran towards the nearest exit of the park. I looked back once, and the clown was still sitting there, his smile now more sinister. We didn't stop running until we reached my house. Out of breath, we piled into the living room, slamming the door behind us. We tried to laugh it off, but the mood had shifted. We were all on edge, checking the windows to make sure that the clown wasn't following us. We eventually relaxed a bit and put on a movie. Hours passed, and at around 1 a.m. after the movie was over, my friends began to leave one by one. After the last one left, I locked the door and turned off the lights. I settled onto the couch, thinking I might finally get some sleep. But then I heard a faint sound outside, an engine slowly driving up the street. I walked quietly to the window and peeked through the blinds. There it was, the same old sedan from earlier, and the window rolled down with that same clown staring straight at my house. His face was illuminated by the dashboard lights, and his grin seemed wider than before. He just sat there, motionless, as if waiting for me to make a move. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. I wanted to call the police, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself or risk being seen. I stayed away from the window, pacing in the dark. The engine continued to run, and I could hear the faint sound of some circus tune music playing. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I didn't want to look, but curiosity gnawed at me, so I moved back to the window to take a look outside. I could see the clown now tapping his fingers against the steering wheel, still wearing that disturbing grin. Suddenly, he turned his head towards my window, as if sensing I was watching. My heart stopped, and I ducked down quickly, wondering if he had seen me. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the car door slam. I held my breath, waiting for the sound of footsteps. But instead, I heard the engine rev and the car speed off into the night. That image of the car and clown inside scared me for a while, and for the next couple weeks I was paranoid, always checking around me if it was nearby, especially at night. Many years ago, I used to live in this crappy apartment by myself. I had a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom unit on the second floor of the building. During the time of this event, I'd been living there for over a year. So one night, I was by myself, and I had been home for several hours. It was about 9 o'clock at night or so, and I was hanging out in the living room. I remember that I kept hearing the sound of somebody walking down the hallway. Like I said, the apartment was not the nicest, and it was kind of old, so the walls were pretty thin, and you could hear whenever somebody walked down the hallway. But it wasn't a big problem, because the building was usually pretty quiet, and there were maybe 10 or 12 units total on my floor. So it didn't happen very often where people would walk by. But I seemingly heard somebody walk back and forth down the hallway about 10 times in the span of like 5 or 10 minutes. After hearing this person walk by, I got curious as to what was going on. I got up and walked over to my door, and then looked out of the peephole. After looking out for maybe 10 seconds, I heard footsteps. Then I saw a man walk down the hallway right past my door. He was kind of tall, thin, and had sort of long hair, and I didn't recognize him as anybody who lived there, but I figured that he probably did. After walking past my door, he went down the hallway. I kept watching for a little bit, and then I started to walk away. But I heard the footsteps then coming back, like he turned around, so I walked back over to the door and looked out of it again. This time, the man started walking by again, but right as he got even with my door, he suddenly stopped, and then he turned his head and looked directly at my door. It was like he could see me, and I quickly moved back. It was really creepy. The guy started standing there right in front of my door. I did not go back to look. Instead, I went back into the living room. But a short time later, I heard a knocking on my door. I had a bad feeling about it, knowing that it was the strange guy who was walking up and down the hallways. Obviously, I had no clue what he wanted, but I also didn't want to know. So I did not get up and go answer the door, but he continued to knock. He would knock for a few seconds, stop, and then knock again. This went on for several minutes. I got annoyed, and I eventually got up and went to look again. When I did, I saw this guy still standing there on the other side. He started knocking, seemingly louder than before, now pounding on the door with his fists. Then he actually tried opening my door. It was locked, but I moved away again, hoping that he wouldn't be able to somehow get inside. He kept alternating between pounding on the door and trying to open it. After this went on for a while, I heard the sound of someone else's voice in the hallway. I recognized it as my neighbor Jerry, who lived across the hall and to the right. The guy stopped banging on my door, and I heard the two of them talking. Then, all of a sudden, I heard some shouting and what seemed like an altercation. I went over to the door, and this time I opened it. I saw Jerry laying on the ground, and just barely saw the other guy sprinting to the end of the hallway and then leave. I went over to Jerry and asked if he was okay. Jerry said that the guy had punched him in the face and attacked him. I went and called the police, and then Jerry and I waited for them. Jerry was fine, but he said that he had wanted to see what all the racket was about because he heard the guy knocking on someone's door. He went out and questioned the guy, and he said at that point the guy just attacked him. The police looked around, but the guy had left the building. After that, the man did not return. I don't know why he was trying to get into my apartment, or what he was even doing there. I feel bad that Jerry got beat up, but I'm glad that he was okay. The whole thing was very strange. Several years ago, I moved into a new apartment. This one was nicer than the previous apartment that I had been living in, and I was excited to live there. I got a one-bedroom place on the first floor of the building in an apartment complex that had a few different buildings. So after moving in, within probably 2 weeks of living there, I remember that I got this strange text message. I did not know who it was from because I didn't recognize the number. The text just said hi, and I ignored it, assuming it to be a wrong number or something. Several days later, though, I got another text. It was from the same number, but it said, "I can see you." I found this to be more suspicious now. I wondered if this was actually a wrong number or maybe something else, but quite possibly it was just a prank from a random number. I texted back asking who it was. They did not respond though. I got up and went over to my window and closed the blinds. It was nighttime, and I had a very large window that led out to a patio. Next to that was a small courtyard that connected to the other apartment building. I wondered if somebody could in fact see me, but I didn't really think so. I didn't get any more texts for the rest of that night. Either the next night or the one after, I actually got a call though. When I saw the number was calling me, I hesitated before answering, but my curiosity got the better of me. Even though I was really nervous, I picked up. I said hello, and there was a pause before I heard a whisper of a man on the other end. He just said that he knew where I lived and that I was home. I didn't know what to make of this. I tried asking him who it was, but then he hung up on me. By now, I was really creeped out about this whole situation. After that call though, for a few days, there was nothing. Everything was fine and there were no texts or calls. I was starting to forget about it until late at night when there was a random knock at my door. I was in the other room and instantly thought that the knocking might be connected to the strange texts and stuff. I didn't want to answer it, so I didn't. The knocking continued on and off for about a minute or two. When it finally stopped, after a couple of minutes, I got up and checked the door as well as the hallway. There was nobody there anymore. I was really nervous, but I didn't go to the police or anything. For the next few days, nothing happened, and things were actually fine for a few weeks after that. It had all stopped, and I was really happy about it, but I didn't know why. Then I ended up finding out something crazy. There was this guy who lived in the apartment complex, and he had been arrested for stalking a woman who lived in the next building from mine. When I heard the details of the case, it sounded very similar to me. He had texted and called her repeatedly before somehow entering her apartment one night. She managed to escape and call police, leading to the guy being caught. When I heard this, I realized why it had stopped, because the man was caught. I'm really glad that they got him when they did. This is the story of the time that I got a job from Craigslist. Years ago, when I was in college, I hardly had any money. I was really busy, And I remember during the summer one year, I got this internship, but I didn't get paid anything for it. I was living with my parents, so I didn't have too many expenses, but I still wanted to have a little bit of money. I couldn't get a job because I didn't have enough time in my schedule. But that gave me the idea to look on Craigslist for something that I could do on a weekend sometime. I knew that there were people who would pay money for you to do yard work for them or something. And yard work was exactly the type of thing that I was looking for. I was pretty confident in my skills, and after looking on Craigslist for a couple of days, I saw an ad that interested me. It was a man who said he needed somebody to do quite a bit of work on his property. The job would take several hours at least, but he was willing to pay good money for it. And the guy also said that there was potential that he would need work done again another time. The ad did not have a specific day, but said to contact him for more information. So I reached out, and pretty quickly I got a response. We arranged a meeting of basically a job interview at a local restaurant. The man's name was Robert, and he seemed to be a nice guy. He said that he owned several houses in the general area. Some he was fixing up to sell, and others to rent. He recently bought a house that needed a lot of yard work done to the property. He said that if I wanted, he might need me for another property in the future as well. The man asked me what day I would be available to work, and I told him. So he gave me the address of the house and said that I could have the job. When the date we agreed on several days later came, I drove to the house and got there when I was supposed to. Robert was not there, but he was at another one of his properties. He said that when I was almost done working to text him and he would come by and pay me. Then I started work. The property of the house was a little bit out there in the country. I was supposed to mow the grass, do some weeding, pick up all the tree branches and stuff in the yard, and then plant a bunch of these flowers that the guy had. The yard was pretty large in both the front and backyard, and at the end of the backyard was a large woods. I'm not sure if that was still his property or not, but I believe at least part of it was. It was definitely a lot of work, but I didn't mind it too much. About an hour in, when I was mowing the grass on the guy's riding mower, I saw something off. I was in the backyard and a good distance away from the house, but I saw what looked like a man staring at me from inside a window to the house. It really took me by surprise, because I was under the impression that the house was empty. I thought that maybe someone was renting the place or something like that. As I kept mowing, I looked over a few more times. When I got a little closer, the man suddenly moved away from the window. I didn't get a good look at him, but later on, I remember that I was mowing in the front and I saw him again. He was once more staring in my direction. When we made eye contact, he didn't move away this time. Instead, he continued to stare at me. I had to look away because it was really weird. I tried to just ignore it though. Soon I finished with the lawn and then went on to the gardening. Once more though, as I was doing this, I noticed the guy staring at me. Not too long after that time, I remember that I got a call from the owner of the house. He was just asking me how things were going and said that he would come by in a little bit. I said that it was going good, but then I decided to ask him if somebody was renting the house. The man said no, the house was currently vacant. I told him how there was a guy inside that kept staring at me. The man told me that he was going to call the police, and he was also going to come over as soon as he could. He recommended that I go to my car and wait in there until the police arrive. I took his advice, and I stopped working and went to my car. I was parked on the side of the street out front, and I kept looking to the windows but no longer saw the man. About 10 minutes later, the police arrived, followed by the homeowner about 2 minutes after that. He opened up the house for the police, and they went inside. About 10 minutes later, they came out and said that the place was empty. The man must have left. I was very confused because I hadn't seen him leave, so it had to be out the back. Robert went inside and said that he saw evidence that somebody else had been there. I didn't go in the house, so I don't know if something was stolen or what, but I was glad that he didn't think I was crazy or making it up. The police looked around the front and backyard briefly and then left. Before Robert left though, he said that he trusted that I would finish and he paid me. I was in fact going to finish, so I stayed there and I continued gardening. I was almost done, and it took me only like 20 or 30 more minutes to finish. When I was done, I was taking the weeds and tossing them in the woods like I was supposed to. As I approached the entrance of the woods, I saw the man again. He was standing pretty deep in the woods, partly behind a tree. I'm not sure if he knew that I saw him or not. I tried to play it off and I calmly walked away. I was really glad that I was done with work. I quickly went to my car and then left. I called Robert and told him that the guy was back. After that, I went home. I'm not sure who that guy was or how he got into the house, but that was a really creepy experience. For a while when I was younger, I had a roommate. We shared a small 2-bedroom house together just outside the city. I didn't know the guy until I moved in, but I didn't have any money and I needed a roommate to afford renting the house, so that was the only reason that I lived with him. We both paid half the rent of the house, and the place was not very nice and pretty cheap. The guy's name was Ben. When we first moved in, we seemed to get along decently. For the first few days, we mostly just stayed in our own rooms or were gone at work. I did run into him in the kitchen once and we talked briefly. He seemed alright. However, about a week or two into living there, and one night I was awoken to the sound of somebody banging on my bedroom door. It was loud enough to wake me, and it continued, so I called out asking who was there. I figured that it had to be Ben, because who else would be in our house? The knocking stopped at that point, but nobody responded to me. So I got up and I walked over to the door, but when I opened it, nobody was there. I looked down the hallway and Ben's door was shut. I figured he had done it, but I didn't know why. Maybe it was a prank. He just didn't seem like the type of guy to pull that kind of a prank though. I went back to bed at that point. When I got up, Ben had already left for his job, and I forgot to talk to him about it anyways. But the next night, basically the same thing happened again. I once more was awoken in the wee hours of the morning to a banging on my bedroom door. This time I was more frustrated, and I called out, "What?" The knocking stopped, and I got up and ran to the door and opened it. When I got there, nobody was in the hallway again, but I looked and saw Ryan's door closing. I went over and knocked on the door, but he didn't answer. I asked what his deal was, but he still said nothing. I thought about barging into the room and giving him a piece of my mind, but I decided not to. I just walked back to my room and returned to sleep. Maybe Ryan was a sleepwalker and that was the explanation. Although sleepwalkers don't generally act that way as far as I'm aware. They're not called sleep pranksters. So the next morning, I wanted to confront Ben, but once more he was gone when I woke up. That night, again, I was awoken to a knocking. This time, I got right out of bed and marched over to the door and opened it. When I did, Ryan was standing right there on the other side. He looked at me, and I asked him what his problem was. Ryan then shoved me backwards before running off to his room. I went after him and tried opening his door, but it was locked. I banged on it for a while, but he didn't answer. So then I just went back to bed again. I was planning on finding a way to move out as soon as possible. The next morning, Ben was not gone yet. When he left his room shortly after I got up, I confronted him. I asked him what on earth he was doing. Ryan said flat out that he didn't like me and he didn't want to live with me. I told him that I was going to move out as soon as humanly possible. Within a few days, I had found an apartment and moved there, which was good because I didn't like living in that house anyways. The apartment was more comfortable. In the meantime, Ryan did not bang on my door at all for the last few nights that I lived there. Looking back, Ryan was definitely a strange guy. I'm not sure if he was trying to scare me out of living there or what. He could have just told me that he wanted me to move out and we could have handled it like men. There was no reason for the crazy nonsense that he did. I'm glad that I found an apartment so quick. When I was about 8 years old, I remember that I took a train one time with my older sister. She would have been 15, I think, and we were going to visit our grandparents. It was just us two, and we were just going for the weekend. Our grandparents lived a few hours away, but there was a train route that went from our city to theirs. My sister and I liked trains, so we wanted to take the train there, and our parents agreed. I remember that we first got to the train station in our city, and it was pretty busy there. Soon we boarded the train and got into our seats. The ride was pretty smooth, and we sat by the windows and watched things go by. I would say that the train was almost completely full with passengers. When we arrived in our grandparents' city, we got off the train along with most of the other people. Some of them were staying to go to the next stop though. So my sister and I walked into the train station, and I guess our grandparents were not there yet to pick us up. As we waited, my sister said that she was going to use the restroom. I didn't have to go, so my sister walked off and I kept standing there. I looked around the station, and it was very busy with lots of other people around. After about 2 minutes or so, I remembered that this woman approached me. I didn't know who she was, but she pointed out to the train and said that my sister was boarding it. I figured that we had to go back on the train, and this wasn't our stop, so I started to walk over. The woman then went with me to the train, and we both started to get back on. Now, to this point, I had just kind of been following my sister. I was young, and I didn't know exactly which stop was ours or which city we were even in. I just figured that I hadn't seen my sister after she had come out of the bathroom. So I actually got back onto the train and then went back to my seat, but I didn't see my sister there. I was confused, so at that point I started looking around the train, thinking maybe she switched seats. The woman who was with me was sitting in the next row over. I didn't ask her where exactly my sister had gone or anything. Instead, I was just silently looking around. After about a minute, I actually saw my sister. She was walking just outside of the station and seemed to be looking around, probably for me. I got up and started to walk for the doors of the train. When I stood, the woman also stood up and asked me where I was going. I told her that my sister was not on the train, and I started walking away. The woman did not say anything back to me. She also didn't go after me or anything. I left the train and then walked over to my sister. I was very confused at this point. But when I reached my sister, she asked me what on earth I was doing back on the train. I told her how the lady told me she had been on, and I figured that we had to take the train to another city. My sister told me that we were in the city that our grandparents lived in, and she didn't know what that lady was talking about. I realized at that point that I may have avoided something bad. The train left a very short time after that, and we got picked up by my grandparents. Looking back at that, I'm really glad that I saw my sister and got off the train when I did. It was about a year ago when my parents and sister went out of state for a sports tournament, and I was left alone in the house for 3 days. I'd never been home by myself for that long, and I thought it would be nice to have some peace and quiet. The first night went by without anything out of the ordinary. I watched a couple of movies, made some popcorn, and went to bed around midnight. I didn't think much of it when I woke up in the middle of the night with an uneasy feeling. It was not anything specific, just a weird sense that someone was watching me. I shrugged it off and went back to sleep. The next day, everything seemed fine. I spent most of the time inside, just relaxing and watching more movies. By the evening, the feeling started to creep up again, like there was someone there, even though I was alone. I checked the house to make sure that all the doors and windows were locked, and everything looked normal. I even walked around the yard for a bit to see if anybody was outside, but I didn't find anything. By the time the third night rolled around, I was starting to get a little jumpy. I woke up again between 2 and 3 a.m. and I heard footsteps outside. It wasn't anything loud, just faint footsteps like somebody was walking on the gravel path outside. My heart started to race a bit, but I convinced myself it was probably just an animal, maybe a raccoon or something. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I couldn't fall asleep again, so I grabbed my shoes and flashlight, and I went outside to check things out and ease my mind. I walked around the house, shining the flashlight around, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel stupid about going outside alone in the middle of the night when I heard something from the woods behind the house. It was faint, but it sounded like a branch snapping, like something was walking through the trees. I don't know what made me do it, but I walked towards the sound. As I got about halfway from my house to the edge of the woods, I heard a loud, blood-curdling scream. I don't know if it was an animal or human, but it's a wild area behind my house, and it could have been a fox or a mountain lion. Either way, I freaked out, ran inside, and locked all the doors and windows. I peered through the curtains, trying to see if I could spot anything or anyone. I opened the curtains to a man standing close to the window, staring directly at me. As soon as he saw me, he turned and sprinted towards the woods. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, so I stayed up and watched more movies, and thankfully nothing else happened that night. When my parents came back the next day, I didn't tell them what happened. Since then, I've been home alone 5 more times, and I've never seen the man again. I don't know what he was doing, and if the scream I heard was related to him or not, or just a coincidence from an animal, but it was a scary night. I live alone. This is something that happened just a few months ago. So my apartment is pretty standard for the most part. However, The front door opens right up to the outside, and there's a small grass area there. To the right of that is the parking lot. Then there are several levels of units. Mine is on the first level. I was at home one evening after I had gotten back from work. I was in the kitchen cooking, and right in the middle of that, my doorbell rang. I wasn't able to go over to the door right away, but I stopped what I was doing and then went over there. This was maybe 20 seconds after the bell had rang. When I got there though, I didn't see anybody. I looked out the window to as much as I could see, and there was nobody there. So at that point, I just went back to cooking. I didn't really know who it could be or why somebody would be ringing my doorbell. I figured that it was most likely someone at the wrong apartment though. Nothing else happened for a while. Several hours later, I was in my living room just hanging out. Then the doorbell rang again. I remembered from before and wondered if that person was back. Then the doorbell started ringing again and again, a bunch of times really fast. I was so confused. I got up and started walking over to the door. In the time that I was going over there, the doorbell ringing stopped. Before opening the door though, I made it to the window and then looked outside. When I did, I was surprised to see that nobody was there again. They had been ringing my doorbell so many times in a row like they really wanted me to answer, and now they were just gone. I didn't know what to make of it. I looked around for several minutes but didn't see anyone. After that, I went back to what I was doing. I only stayed up for maybe another hour if that. Then I was tired and decided to go to bed. I started turning off the lights in my apartment, but before heading to my bedroom, I went over to the front door and looked out of the window one last time. However, this time I saw something. There was this tall and kind of thin man just standing there a few feet away from my door. He wasn't facing me, but kind of to the side. He didn't appear to really be doing anything though. The guy was wearing all black clothing, and I had no idea who he was. I thought that this was maybe the person who kept ringing my doorbell. It just seemed really suspicious though. I watched him for several minutes. The man just stood there and sort of looked around. Then he started walking away slowly. He went in the grass area out front, and then he walked across the quiet street that was there. After crossing, he walked right into the woods. There was no path or anything. He just went right in, and the woods there is very thick. I was so confused and also creeped out. Since then, I haven't had any more strange doorbell rings or anything. I also haven't seen the guy, and I'm still wondering who he is and what he was doing. I'm also wondering why he just went in the woods like that. When I was a freshman in college, I lived in the dorms and I got a random roommate. I thought that it would work out fine because I get along well with most people and make friends pretty easily. I figured that my roommate would probably get along with me as well, even if we didn't like the same things. Obviously, I hoped that he would have similar interests and maybe we could become good friends, because I didn't really know anybody else at the university that I was going to at the time. Well, when I moved into the dorms, my roommate was not there. His name was Ryan, and his stuff was there, but I wasn't quite sure where he was. After my parents had helped me finish moving in all my stuff and left, Ryan was still nowhere in sight. In fact, he did not show up until the next day. It was when I got back from my first class and had a little bit of time left before my next one. When I entered the room, Ryan was just there, sitting at his desk and apparently doing homework. Ryan was about average height and weight, had glasses, and short blondish colored hair. Right away, he did not seem very friendly. When I entered the room, he turned and looked at me, but did not say hi or anything. Just as fast as he looked at me, he turned his head back to his desk. I said hi and walked over to him and stuck my hand out for a handshake. I remember he sort of hesitated, but did shake my hand. I had a brief conversation with him, asking him about himself. He was not a freshman like me, but a sophomore at the school, and he was from a small town several hours away. That was really all that I gathered. Soon, I went to my next class. After that, things only got more and more strange. Ryan was not often in his room, but when he was, I would sometimes try talking to him. He would usually give me very short answers and never ask me anything about myself. I thought maybe he was just shy or uncomfortable around other people, but at one point, he told me in a very stern way to stop talking to him and to not talk to him anymore. It was pretty rude, and I no longer felt like he was just a shy kid, but a kind of rude one. Still, I didn't want it to be a terrible semester, so I chose not to argue or anything. I decided to just let him be on his side of the room, and I would do my thing on my side. As the weeks went on, Ryan would be gone for sometimes days at a time. I would wake up and he would just be gone. Then when it would be nighttime, he still wouldn't be there, and I wouldn't see him for several days. Then, typically, he'd just walk into the room like nothing happened, or I'd come back and he'd already be there. I never bothered to ask him where he was though, knowing that he didn't want me talking to him. I remember at one point, on one of the days that he was at the dorm, he left sometime in the evening. Hours later, at probably like 11 o'clock at night or so, I remember I heard talking in the hallway. It got louder, and I realized that two guys were arguing. I recognized Ryan's voice to be one of them. He loudly told the guy to shut up, and a few seconds later, he walked into the room. I found out the next day that it was another guy who lived on our floor who he yelled at. Apparently, all the guy said to him was, "Hey, how's it going?" when they passed each other in the hallway. Ryan snapped at him immediately, telling him not to talk to him, which made the other guy angry. They argued briefly before Ryan walked away. I found this out because the other guy came up to me and told me that my roommate was really strange. That's when we had the conversation, and I was kind of creeped out by Ryan's erratic behavior. As the next few weeks went on, I was hoping to be able to get a new roommate when the next semester rolled around. In the meantime, I just ignored Ryan and he did the same to me. It really wasn't that bad because he was typically gone, so it was mostly like I had my own dorm to myself. You just never knew when Ryan would be back or how long he would be there. So one day, I remember that I got up and went to class. Ryan had been gone for the whole night and was still gone when I got up and left. I was away for several hours attending my classes. When I returned to the dorm room, I went inside to see everything on my side of the room just gone. It was the craziest thing that I'd ever seen. The bed, desk, and chair that came with the room were still there, but literally everything that I had was gone. My books, my blankets and pillows, clothes, snacks, and everything was nowhere in sight. Ryan's side of the room looked exactly the same, and Ryan was not there. I went inside the room and looked around, trying to figure out what happened. I was sure that I locked the door when I left, and I immediately suspected Ryan. I started to look on his side of the room. He really didn't have that much stuff to begin with. He really just had some clothes, a few blankets, and some notebooks. There was no place that he could have put all my things. After realizing that my stuff was definitely not in the room, I walked out into the hallway. I went to the resident assistant and told him what happened. We did a small investigation looking around the building, and soon we got in touch with campus security. Unfortunately, the dorm building was really old and did not have any security cameras inside of it. Luckily, I had made a few friends by that point in the school year. One had a dorm room all to himself, so I stayed in his spare bed for the next couple of nights. An investigation was done, and Ryan was nowhere to be seen. Several days later, though, my things were found. They were located a little ways into a woods just off campus. He had tossed all my stuff there. Ryan, meanwhile, did not show up for the entire rest of the semester. I was given a new dorm room all to myself by the school, and they also gave me a gift card to buy some new stuff, so that was nice. But as far as I'm aware, Ryan never showed up to campus again. I have no idea where he went. He was a very strange guy, but I'm glad that I didn't have to live with him any longer. This happened when I was about 10 or 11, camping with my mom near a river in the woods. It was just the two of us out there, no one else around. The nearest farmhouse was a couple of miles away, but we were mostly alone. We had the tent set up and a small campfire going when a little before dark, this man arrived to our site. The area we were in was open to anyone wanting to camp, so it wasn't strange to see somebody else, but he had no gear with him at all. He made conversation with us and eventually came around to warning us that there were wild dogs in the area that we needed to watch out for. My mom and I were slightly uncomfortable because he didn't leave and said that he would stay at the campsite a while to protect us from the wild dogs. My mom hinted several times that we would be fine and that he was free to leave because we didn't need his protection. But he didn't leave. He stayed a long time, but there wasn't much we could do because it was a public campsite. He had the right to be there if he wanted, even though he had no camping stuff with him. Eventually, my mom told the man that we were going into our tent for the night, thanked him for keeping us company, and said that he could leave and we would be fine. I asked my mom quietly if he was going to hurt us, and she said of course not, but I could tell by the way her voice cracked that she was scared too. We didn't want to provoke him, but we didn't want to make him feel like we were scared either. So we just crawled into our tent while the man kept sitting on a log at the fire pit. I don't think my mom slept that night, as she had a knife close to where she lay in the tent. I watched the man through the flap in the tent for a while. At one point, while sitting by the fire, he pulled out a long knife and started sharpening it on a stick. He just stared down at the blade and ran it along the stick, making these slow scraping sounds. I asked my mom if he was going to kill us, and she kept saying no, but I could tell that she was worried. She tried not to show it, but she was prepared for the worst. I eventually fell asleep, but woke up a lot to see my mom was still awake, lying there and listening to the scraping sound of the knife on the stick. By morning, the guy was gone. I wasn't sure how long he had stayed or when he left. After packing up our gear, we stopped by the nearest farmhouse to tell somebody about the strange man. At the farmhouse, the old man there listened to our story, then kind of chuckled and said, "Oh, that's just Ivan. He means well, just doesn't know how to mind his own business." Apparently, he lived on a farm nearby, and the old man promised us that he'd have another word with his neighbor, reminding him not to be so rude and strange. A few years later, after our camping trip where we had met Ivan, I saw something disturbing. I was watching the news, and a man had been arrested who was a suspect in several missing person cases. They showed his photo on TV, and even though it had been a few years ago, I instantly noticed it was the guy who had been with us at the campsite. His name was Ivan Milat, a serial killer who had been picking up hitchhikers along the highways and killing them, and burying their bodies in the woods right across the river from where we had camped. I can't even describe the way I felt when I realized it. The guy who had been lurking outside our tent, sharpening a knife, talking about wild dogs, had been a serial killer. We had come so close to him, and I had no idea at the time. I don't think I'll ever forget that night and how lucky we were, but it still haunts me. A couple of years ago, my phone broke. It had been pretty old, and I was sort of meaning to get a new one. But after breaking, I had to find a new one fast. I thought about going to the store or looking online. But to try to save some money, I went on Facebook Marketplace. I also wanted to get one as fast as possible. I had heard there were a lot of good cell phones there for cheap. After maybe 30 minutes of looking, I found one. It was the same phone that I had before, but a few generations newer. The price also seemed very cheap compared to what it would be elsewhere. So at that point, I decided to send the seller a message saying that I wanted to buy the phone. Now, the seller's Facebook account was pretty mysterious. Their name was just JM. I clicked on their profile, and they did not have a profile picture. There wasn't much information about them either. Still, I didn't think that was too big of a deal, and I contacted them. It did not take long before I heard back. The seller, Jay, I guess, told me that I could buy the phone as soon as that night, and I agreed. I suggested that we meet at a local shopping center. However, Jay said they could not do that because they had kids and could not leave their house. Instead, I was supposed to come over that night. I said okay, and I agreed to it. I understood that people with kids probably wouldn't be able to just go whenever. So I was given an address, and that night I drove to it. It took maybe 15 minutes to get there. It was a little bit far away in an area that I had never been before. When I got to the address, I saw that it was a house that looked slightly run down, and there didn't appear to be any lights on inside. The whole neighborhood looked a little bit run down, and the houses had fairly large properties. I had no way of texting the seller that I was there because of my phone being broken, but I had my watch, and I was right on time for when we agreed. So I walked up to the front step and rang the doorbell. After maybe 30 seconds, the door started to open. There were two doors, a screen door and then an actual one. The inside door opened just a few inches, and I saw a woman was standing behind it. She told me to go around to the back and then close the door. So I walked around to behind the house and then entered a back door there. This led into a dimly lit kitchen area. The woman was there inside and sitting at a table. I entered and then sat down across from her. It appeared as though every light in the rest of the house was off. We both just sat there in awkward silence for a few moments. Then I mentioned the phone, saying I would like to buy it. The woman said that she would go and get the phone and got up. I kept sitting at the table. She left the room and I waited at the table. The whole thing so far had seemed really strange. As I looked around, I saw no signs of her having kids. So I waited at the table for at least a good 5 minutes. I didn't know what was taking so long. Did she lose the phone or something? I decided to ask. I called out asking if she was okay, and she called back from the other room saying yes, and it would just be a moment. So I kept sitting there, but then at least 5 more minutes went by. I was starting to feel nervous. It was just really strange. When she left the room, she didn't turn any other lights on either. I could barely see around the kitchen as it was. Eventually, I got impatient and I stood up. I walked to the end of the kitchen and to the entrance of what appeared to be the living room. There was no sign of the woman. I called out again, asking what was taking so long. This time, though, I got no response. I kept standing there looking into the living room, and there was a hallway at the end of it. It was really dark, like I said, but after standing there for like a minute, I thought I saw the woman cross the hallway. She did not bother to say anything or acknowledge me. This was really weird. I walked back into the kitchen. I thought about things, and then I decided to just leave. This whole situation was creeping me out, and I didn't know what was going on. So I walked over to the back door, left, and then walked back out to my car. When I did, I looked back at the house. I saw now that one of the lights was on in a front window which hadn't been before. The woman was looking out of that window and staring at me from inside. It just really creeped me out. I got back inside of my car and drove home. After that, I went and bought a cell phone from the store.